Have you ever created something by accident? Whether it's the mixture of two different paints that in the end creates a new color, or simply a recipe that was forgotten in the oven for a long time and ended up becoming a crunchy and delicious snack, the fact is that throughout our lives, many things in general end up having a different result than expected, and thus often generating something positive and incredibly useful. After all, many people don't know this, but many of the utensils, foods, and medicines common in our daily lives that are extremely important to our lives were created by accident, and it is with this in mind that we have put together a list of some of these to present in today's video. 20 accidental inventions that changed the world. Friction match. And opening our list of accidental inventions that changed the world are the famous and classic friction matches. The history of friction matches began many years ago, more specifically in 1669, when the German alchemist Henning Brand, while distilling a mixture of urea and sand in search of the philosopher's stone, which was supposed to turn any metal it touched into gold, accidentally discovered the element phosphorus. This was a very important milestone in the development of what would later become friction matches, and it also happened accidentally. But the real accidental creation that gave rise to the friction matches we know today took place in 1826, when the English chemist John Walker was stirring a mixture of chemicals, and then realized that a piece of wood he was using to stir the mixture had a dry residue on the end, and in trying to scrape this residue off, he accidentally created a flame. Walker quickly realized the potential of this accidental discovery and decided to perfect it in order to start producing and selling the first friction matches. This fantastic invention revolutionized the way people lit fires, making the process much more convenient, facilitating everyday life, and having a significant impact on various industries, including cooking and lighting. However, despite being very useful, these first friction matches were also quite dangerous, and therefore had to undergo several other changes and improvements over the years until they reached the standards we know and use today. Penicillin. Now let's talk about what is probably the most important accidental invention of all time, the invention of penicillin. It all began in 1928 in the hands of the Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming. Fleming, like many scientists of his time, was dedicated to the study of bacteria, in particular those of the Staphylococcus genus, responsible for various infections. During one of his experiments, he went on vacation and accidentally left some petri dishes with bacterial cultures exposed to the air in his laboratory. When he returned to the laboratory a few days later, Fleming noticed something intriguing. One of the dishes had been contaminated by a type of blue-green mold, and around this mold, the bacteria had been destroyed. Intrigued by this observation, Fleming isolated the mold and began to study it, thus realizing that this substance produced by the fungus was capable of inhibiting the growth of various bacteria. This substance was then called penicillin. Alexander Fleming's discovery, however, did not have an immediate impact. At that time, the purification and large-scale production of penicillin was still a major challenge. It wasn't until the 1940s, with the efforts of two other scientists called Ernst Chain and Howard Florey, that it was possible to develop an efficient method for producing penicillin in large quantities. In addition, the Second World War was another factor that accelerated the process of developing penicillin due to the need to treat soldiers' infected wounds, which further boosted the research and production of this antibiotic that quickly proved effective in treating various bacterial infections that were previously fatal and marked the beginning of the antibiotic era. Microwave oven. The history of the microwave oven began during the Second World War, in a very different context from what we imagine when we think of cooking. An engineer called Percy Spencer worked for the Raytheon Company, a company that manufactured magnetrons, which were devices used in radars, emitting microwaves to detect enemy aircraft. Once, on an ordinary day at work, Spencer noticed something peculiar. A bar of chocolate he was carrying in his pocket had melted. Intrigued, he began to investigate the cause of this phenomenon, and the most likely hypothesis was that the microwaves emitted by the magnetron were responsible for the chocolate melting. With this discovery, Spencer began to carry out experiments to better understand the effect of microwaves on food, and these initial experiments demonstrated the potential of microwaves to cook food quickly and efficiently. So, in 1945, the Raytheon Company filed a patent application in the United States for Spencer's microwave cooking process, and in 1947 launched the first commercial microwave oven. Post-it note. The story of the Post-it note began in the 1960s, when a scientist called Spencer Silver was working on an ambitious project to develop a super strong glue capable of adhering to any surface. However, his experiments took an unexpected turn. That's because instead of creating a powerful glue, Silver ended up developing an adhesive that stuck slightly, but not permanently. However, as interesting as this new substance was, it had no apparent practical application, since this weak glue didn't serve the original purpose it had been intended for. So it was only a few years later that another scientist called Art Fry found a use for Silver's creation, coming up with the idea of using this adhesive to fix his bookmark to his hymnal, but in a way that could be easily removed. This idea of Art's worked perfectly, and from then on he began distributing small pieces of paper with this glue to his work colleagues, who soon realized the potential of the invention. And with that, the company where he worked, seeing the opportunity for a new product, decided to launch Post-it note on the market, which ended up being an immediate success and continues to be part of our lives to this day, being considered an indispensable item for places like schools and offices all over the world. SACCHARIN. Do you wash your hands before meals? Well, you probably do, as this is a common hygiene habit, but this next accidental invention we're going to show you probably wouldn't have existed if this hygiene habit had taken place. We're talking about the discovery of saccharin, one of the world's most famous artificial sweeteners, and also the first to be commercialized on a large scale. At the end of the 19th century, Russian chemist Konstantin Fallberg and American chemist Ira Remsen were working in a laboratory at Johns Hopkins University in the United States, when, on an ordinary working day, Fallberg absentmindedly forgot to wash his hands after handling some chemical compounds, and, to his surprise, when he was eating a meal, he felt an extremely sweet taste on his hands. Intrigued by the discovery, he began to investigate which substances in his laboratory could have caused such an intense sweet sensation. And after several experiments, Fallberg isolated the compound responsible for the sweet taste and named it saccharin. This substance was around 300 times sweeter than ordinary sugar, and the most interesting thing about it was that it didn't provide any calories. With this, the discovery of saccharin revolutionized the food industry and paved the way for the development of several other artificial sweeteners that are now widely used around the world. Dynamite. Despite often being seen as something negative because of its association with explosions and destruction, dynamite is actually a very positive invention in world history, which has enabled several important feats to be accomplished, and has played a fundamental role in many constructions and industrial advances. But have you ever stopped to think about how dynamite was invented? In 1867, Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel was working to find a safer way to handle and transport a substance called nitroglycerin, which was highly explosive and unstable. To solve this problem, Nobel tried to combine nitroglycerin with another substance that would make it safe to transport and handle, but would not reduce its effectiveness as an explosive, and after several unsuccessful combinations, he finally tried mixing nitroglycerin with diatomaceous earth. And to his surprise, this idea actually worked, as this mixture resulted in a much more stable substance that could be molded into sticks and handled safely, thus giving birth to what we know today as dynamite. VIAGRA. Now let's talk about the accidental creation of one of the world's most famous and widely used drugs, sildenafil, popularly known as Viagra. In the 1990s, a pharmaceutical company was looking for a drug to treat angina chest pain caused by a lack of blood flow to the heart when it developed a substance called sildenafil, with the expectation that it would relax the blood vessels in the heart, thus relieving the pain. However, clinical trials revealed that this substance caused a slightly different side effect than expected. This was because sildenafil caused erections in many of the men taking part in the study. Therefore, realizing the potential of this side effect, the pharmaceutical company responsible for this study decided to redirect the focus of the drug to treating erectile dysfunction, and so sildenafil began to be marketed under many brand names, including Viagra, for which it became known worldwide, and is currently one of the best-selling drugs in the world, and has a significant impact on the quality of life of many men. Teflon. You've probably used or at least heard of the famous non-stick pans, which allow you to prepare food without sticking, right? But something you probably didn't know is that they only exist because of this next accidental invention we're about to show you. Polytetrafluoroethylene, better known as Teflon, was discovered accidentally in 1938 by chemist Roy Plunkett while working for a chemical company and trying to develop a new type of refrigerant. In one of his experiments, Plunkett cooled a gas called tetrafluoroethylene to turn it into a liquid, and when he opened the container to analyze the result, he was was surprised. The gas had turned into a white, slippery, inert powder. This white powder was polytetrafluoroethylene, which would later be marketed as Teflon, and had extraordinary characteristics, as it was extremely resistant to high temperatures, chemicals, and abrasion, and also had a very low coefficient of friction, meaning that nothing would stick to it. All these unique characteristics made Teflon ideal for a variety of applications, and so it was initially used mainly for military purposes due to its resistance. However, after the war, Teflon began to be exploited for domestic uses, and this gave rise to Teflon-coated non-stick pans, which are extremely famous and used today because of their potential to cook food without sticking. Vulcanized rubber. You may never have heard of vulcanized rubber, but it is something very important in our lives, present in countless everyday objects from shoes to car tires, and just like the others on this list, it was also invented by accident. In 1839, an American inventor called Charles Goodyear was trying to solve a common problem with natural rubber, which hardened and cracked in the cold, while in the heat it melted and became sticky. During one of his experiments, Charles mixed rubber with sulfur and accidentally dropped the mixture on a hot stove, and to his surprise, the rubber didn't melt as usual, but became more elastic and resistant. He then realized that the combination of rubber and sulfur, when heated, created a much more durable and versatile material, and thus vulcanized rubber was born, which revolutionized many industries, allowing the production of a multitude of products that require elasticity and resistance to temperature variations. Slinky. Now we're going to talk about the Slinky, that metal spring that descends stairs in an almost magical way, and which is a very famous toy loved by children. It all started in 1943, when a naval engineer called Richard James was working on a device to stabilize sensitive equipment on board ships during rough voyages. During one of his experiments, he accidentally dropped a coiled spring on the floor, and was surprised to see it move from side to side, as if it were walking. Intrigued by the spring's behavior, and realizing its possible potential as a toy, Richard took the idea home, and with the help of his wife, Betty James, began to produce and sell the Slinky, which was named after Betty, and was a sales success, thus becoming one of the most iconic and popular toys in the world. X-rays. The discovery of X-rays is another fascinating story of accidental discovery. In 1895, German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen was conducting experiments with cathode ray tubes in his laboratory in Germany. During one experiment, he covered the tube with thick black paper to block out all visible light. However, when he turned on the device, he noticed a fluorescent glow on a screen located a few meters away from the tube. Intrigued by this inexplicable phenomenon, Röntgen dedicated himself to trying to understand what was happening, and soon realized that he had discovered a new type of radiation, which he called X-rays, due to its enigmatic and unknown nature at the time. To investigate this discovery further, Röntgen placed various objects between the tube and the screen, and observed that they all seemed to become transparent, and after exhaustive experiments with inanimate objects, he asked his wife to place his hand in the path of the invisible rays, the result of which was a shaded image that revealed the internal bone structure of the hand. Röntgen's accidental discovery revolutionized medicine, allowing doctors to view the inside of the human body without the need for surgery, and so X-rays quickly became an indispensable tool for medical diagnoses and are still widely used today. Cornflakes. Cornflakes are certainly a common breakfast food for many people, but have you ever wondered how this famous cereal was invented? It all started in 1894, when brothers John Kellogg and Will Kellogg were looking for new food options for the patients at the sanatorium they ran in Michigan. One day, during one of their experiments, they left a portion of boiled wheat to rest for too long, which caused it to go rancid and seemingly useless for consumption. However, as their budget was strict, instead of wasting the wheat, the brothers decided to continue with the process, forcing it with rollers and hoping to obtain thin, long sheets of dough, but to their surprise, what they actually got were small flakes, which they then decided to bake and serve to their patients, and after a few weeks, they realized that the patients who consumed these flakes showed a significant improvement in their digestive health. Intrigued by this discovery, they decided to try the same process with other types of grain, including corn, and the result was surprisingly successful, as the corn flakes were not only edible, but also pleasant to the taste. So, with a few adaptations and improvements, the Kellogg brothers patented the process and began producing cornflakes on a large scale, giving rise to one of the world's most popular breakfasts. VELCRO. We have to admit that so far we've talked about inventions that have come about in very curious and unexpected ways, right? But would you believe it if we told you that a walk with a dog could give rise to one of the most famous and used inventions in the world? That's right, we're talking about the invention of Velcro. In 1941, a Swiss engineer called Georges de Mestral was hiking in the Alps with his dog, and when he returned home, he noticed that his clothes and his pet's fur were covered in tiny seeds from a plant called burdock. Curious as to how these seeds attached themselves so firmly, he decided to analyze them with a microscope, and to his surprise, on looking closely at the seeds, George discovered that they had tiny hooks that clung to his clothes and his dog's fur. Fascinated by this discovery, he began to imagine the possibilities of creating a fastener inspired by this natural mechanism, and after years of research and development, George finally managed to develop a synthetic material that mimicked the structure of the burdock seed hooks and combined this material with a soft fabric, thus forming what we know today as Velcro. Laminated safety glass. Invented at the beginning of the 20th century, laminated safety glass is certainly one of the world's most valuable discoveries when it comes to safety. It was created accidentally by the French painter and chemist Edouard Benedictus, who realized one day that a glass jar containing cellulose nitrate that had fallen to the ground had not shattered into thousands of pieces, as was usually the case. Instead, this glass had broken into large fragments, which were held together by a thin film, and on closer inspection, Benedictus realized that the film of cellulose nitrate, which had dried inside the jar, had created a kind of membrane that prevented the glass from spreading when it broke. Intrigued by this discovery, he began to investigate the phenomenon further, and after several experiments, developed a process to produce laminated safety glass, which is widely used today because it significantly reduces the risk of injury. Potato chips. You probably know or have at least tried the tasty, crunchy potato chips at some point in your life, right? But did you know that this delicacy, which is so popular all over the world, was invented by accident? According to the story, in the 19th century, a chef called George Crumb was experiencing problems in the restaurant where he worked due to a particularly demanding customer who complained about the thickness of the potatoes he was served. Annoyed by this complaint, George cut the potatoes into very thin slices, fried them until they were crispy, and put a large amount of salt on them, thinking that the customer wouldn't like the texture and the exaggerated flavor. However, to his surprise, the customer loved the new potatoes. And so from that day on, potato chips quickly became a hit in the restaurant and soon spread to other places in the world. Super glue. Superglue is another item that had a rather curious and unexpected origin. In 1942, chemist Harry Coover was trying to develop a transparent plastic for gun sights during the Second World War when, during one of his experiments, he created a substance that proved to be extremely sticky and difficult to handle. At the time, Harry considered the substance a failure, as it didn't serve the original purpose of the research. However, a few years later, while working on a different project, Harry and a colleague rediscovered that sticky substance and realized its true commercial potential as a powerful adhesive, and so with a few more advances and improvements, superglue finally began to be marketed in 1958 and quickly became popular due to its ability to bond materials quickly and effectively, and is now widely used in a variety of applications, from household repairs to industrial uses. Smoke detector. Now let's talk about another valuable and life-saving accidental invention, the smoke detector. In 1939, Swiss physicist Walter Jaeger was trying to develop a gas sensor to detect poisonous gases and hoped that the sensor would work by ionizing the air and measuring electrical conductivity. However, unfortunately, this device didn't achieve its intended purpose. Frustrated by the failure of his experiment, Jaeger decided to light a cigarette and was surprised to notice that a meter on the instrument had registered a drop in the circuit's current. At that moment, he realized that, unlike the poisonous gas, the smoke particles from his cigarette were capable of altering the circuit current, and so this discovery paved the way for the development of the first smoke detectors, which over the years were increasingly developed and improved to the standards we know today. Ice pop. Now let's talk about the ice pop, another accidental invention that only came about because of a child's carelessness. In 1905, an 11-year-old boy named Frank Epperson was playing with a mixture of water and soda powder at his home in Oakland when he accidentally forgot the mixture on the porch with a spoon inside during a cold winter's night. The next morning, to his surprise, Epperson found the mixture and realized that it had frozen around the spoon. Intrigued by this discovery, he began to repeat the experiment, adding different flavors to the water, and thus realized that he had created a new, refreshing, and delicious dessert. Years later, in 1923, Epperson finally decided to patent his invention and began selling ice pops commercially, which quickly became popular and are a success to this day, especially during the hot months. Silly putty. During the Second World War, scientists were trying to create a synthetic substitute for the natural rubber that was in short supply due to its use in the war, when one day they developed an elastic and sticky substance, which, although not suitable as a rubber substitute, had unique properties that made it fun to manipulate, as it could be stretched and molded. However, despite its interesting properties, this sticky putty didn't find an immediate practical use, and it wasn't until a few years later, when an entrepreneur realized its potential as a toy and bought the rights to produce it, that it began to be produced on a large scale, thus giving rise to the toy we know today as Silly Putty. Coca-Cola. And finally, know that it is. Incredible as it may seem, the creation of the world's most famous soft drink also happened by accident. In 1886, pharmacist John Pemberton was looking for a remedy to relieve headaches and digestive problems when one day in his laboratory he mixed several ingredients, including coca leaves, cola nuts, sugar, and carbonated water, resulting in a dark, carbonated syrup with a unique, stimulating taste. At the time, Pemberton believed he had created a medicinal tonic, and initially this drink was sold in pharmacies as a health tonic. However, this drink soon became popular among the townspeople for its ability to invigorate and refresh, so Pemberton decided to market it as a soft drink instead of a medicine, thus giving rise to Coca-Cola, which is currently the world's best-selling soft drink and a recognized brand in many countries. But what do you think? What was the most surprising and fantastic accidental invention on this list? Let us know in the comments which one impressed you the most, and if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos we'll be bringing here. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.